Hi everyone, in the next few parts of this tutorial series, we will be making a weapon manager for our game. Now, just as a side note, this weapon manager is not fully general purpose, as it is going to have a lot of issues from a design perspective. But at the same time, I think it can be used for many basic game projects. So by the end of this video, we will able to equip and unequip weapons as well as have the basics of weapon manager setup. Now before we begin, let's better understand the type of weapon manager we will be using for our game. So this is our loadout. It has 3 slots, where the first one is when there is no weapon equipped, while the other 2 are for the primary and secondary weapons. And as visible, we can switch to either of these by any sort of input we feel like. The weapons in the second row are the ones we can pick up. Now suppose we want to swap the weapon in the primary slot with the one on the ground. In this case we will swap pistol with a rifle, and doing so drops the pistol on the ground and we get the rifle in our loadout. A thing to note here is that we won't be having any restrictions on the type of weapons we can have in any given slot, so we can easily have 2 rifles in our loadout. Now in most games a weapon swap happens only when we have 2 different weapons needed to be switched, but in the case when 2 weapons are of same type, the ammo of the weapon to be picked up is added to the currently equipped weapon. Now let's try to swap a pistol with another pistol. Here the ammo in the pistol which is on the ground is added to the pistol in the loadout. Similarly, we can also drop a weapon from the loadout. Then if we will try to pick up a weapon from the ground, then that will be added on the very first empty slot found in the loadout. So this is how our weapon manager is going to work. So let's start from where we last left from. I will start by doing some minor changes. First of all, I will set the default scene to the world scene. Then I will change the resolution and set full screen to true. Now I will start by creating the weapons. By the way, in the next part I will add weapon models to the game. But right now we will just work with the primitive shapes to better understand how we are doing things. Now I will adjust the mesh instance in order to make it look like a pistol. Also, you can adjust the weapon however you feel like, or you can use a model as well, which I am going to do in the next part. Also, while aligning the meshes, treat the world origin as a pivot point, since that will help us when rotating the weapon. And make sure that the weapon is pointing in the negative z-axis. Now I will add a spatial node and add both meshes as a child of it. This way we will able to control the meshes by a single node. Now I will create 2 more spatial nodes. Here anchor will be used to animate the equip and unequip animation. While root will remain at the origin and will later be used for ADS. Again, this is just to demonstrate how I have set up the weapon, and later we can replace it with a weapon model. Now I will save the scene and name it pistol_A. Similarly, I will create a new scene for the rifle and perform the same steps as we did with the pistol. Now I will head back to the pistol scene and add an animation player node to it. With this, I will create the equip and unequip animation. To animate, I will rotate the anchor node by a positive 90 degrees. And then add a keyframe to the rotation property of the node. Then a little further ahead, I will add another keyframe with a rotation of 0 degrees around the x-axis. Similarly, I will do the same thing with the unequip animation, but this time it will go from 0 to negative 90 degrees. Now I will add the equip and unequip animations to rifle scene as well. Finally, we are going to create the unarmed scene, which is going to be empty. So most of our setup is pretty much done, except that we need to create just one more thing, and that's the UI to display the currently equipped weapon and its ammo. Now before we proceed ahead, let's add a font to our game. I will head over to Google Fonts and download the Open Sans font. Link to this font is in the description. Now from this list of variants, I will select a few common ones and add them to the project. And now finally we will create the UI to display the player stats, which is also going to help us a lot when debugging our weapon manager. Now I will create a pretty basic UI to display the currently selected weapon, its ammo and the player health. This empty space over here will later be used to display image of the currently selected weapon. For now though, we will just display the weapon slot number over here. Now I will add a spatial node inside the cam root and name it weapons. As a starting point, we will add weapons inside this node, though later it won't be necessary to do so, except for the unarmed scene. So let's add pistol scene to it. Then select the camera and switch to its preview mode. Now adjust the position of the pistol node so that we can clearly see it when it is equipped. Now I will add the rifle scene as well and perform the same steps. Finally, I will add the unarmed scene, and that's pretty much it for the weapons. Now to finish off, add the UI, that is our heads up display in the player scene. And just one thing I forgot to do, and that is to create a crosshair. So I will head over to the HUD scene and create a color rect node and adjust it to look like a crosshair. Now just for a little quick check, let's run the scene and see if everything is working fine or not. That seems okay to me. So now we can finally start with creating our weapon manager. So now select the weapons node and add a script to it. I will name it to weapon_manager. Here all weapons is a dictionary and it will be holding all the weapon scenes we created. So it's basically going to be used to instantiate weapons. Similarly, the weapons variable is also a dictionary and it will be used as a loadout. Whereas the HUD variable will hold a reference to the HUD node, while current weapon will reference to the currently equipped weapon. And current weapon slot will tell us about the active weapon slot like primary, secondary, etc. Changing weapon and unequipped weapon will be used while equipping or unequipping a weapon. I know all of this doesn't make much sense at all, but it will all be clear in just a moment. Now inside ready we will get a reference to the HUD node at the very start. Then we will initialize the all weapons dictionary. Here for the dictionary's value we will preload the weapon scenes which we created earlier and name their corresponding keys accordingly. Now let's initialize the weapons dictionary. Here keys will be representing the weapon slots, and their values will simply be a reference to each weapons we added under the weapons node. Now before we proceed ahead, let's create a base class for all the weapons. I will name it weapon.gd, then set the class name to weapon as well. So these three variables are going to be references which we will assign through the weapon manager script. While the following three will tell us about the current state of the weapon, that is firing, reloading, etc. Whereas for weapon parameters, right now we only have a name, but later we will be adding ammo and some other stuff. These optional variables are for controlling the animation speed. Right now they are for the equip and unequip animation. Now without going into much detail, these set of functions will be related to equipping and unequipping. I will explain them in more detail in just a moment. And you might have already figured this one out. On animation finished is going to be connected to the animation player signal. That is when the animation completes. Finally, update ammo will be used to update the weapon information, like its name and ammo. For now, I will comment out this statement. And before moving ahead, I will call update ammo in the equip function. Now I will create a script for each weapon, which is going to inherit from the weapon class we just created. To be more specific, like a script for all pistols and another for all rifles, like that. So let's create a script which will be used for all types of pistol. And make sure to change the inherit field from spatial to weapon. Now first of all I will connect the animation finished signal of the animation player node to the onAnimationFinished function defined in the parent class, that is the weapon class we inherited from. Also set the reference of animation player variable defined in the parent class to the animation player node. Now I will override the onAnimationFinished function of the parent class. Though right now I won't make any changes to it, but just make sure to call the base function, otherwise it would not call the logic defined in the base class. Now similarly I will create a script for all rifles. Since the code is going to be same, I will simply copy it from pistol and then paste it in rifle. Finally, I will create a script for the unarmed scene. Here I will be overriding most of the functions from the weapon class. but also I won't be calling their base function. So it won't be doing much except for a few things only. But still it is required to have it in order to make our weapon manager work. So now we will head back to the weapon manager script and resume from where we left off. We will start by referencing all the variables in each of the weapons. Now this is probably going to be the last time I go through writing code without any explanation. But once I finish writing this, I will explain how this whole code we have written so far actually works. That's quite a lot of code, but it won't take much time to understand it. So right after weapon initialization, we set current weapon to unarmed, that is to the empty slot, and then call the change weapon function with empty as the argument. So to better understand what change weapon function really does, let's have a look at it. Here we compare new weapon slot with the current weapon slot, and since both of these are equal to empty, so our very first condition becomes true. So now we call current weapon subdate ammo function, which we define in the weapon class, and that would simply update weapon information as well as update the text inside our HUD. And finally we return out of the function. Now whenever this function is called again, we will either be having the input as primary or secondary, so that we can actually change the weapon. So say if we pass primary as the argument, then the first condition becomes false. Then we look at the second condition. Here it simply checks whether the new weapon slot is empty or not. So in this case it will going to be false. So if none of the above two conditions are true, then we proceed ahead to change the weapon. So first of all we update the current weapon slot with the new one. Then set changing weapon to true. Then we call update ammo function of the new weapon. Now we set unequip weapon to false and call the current weapon's unequip function. And if we look at the function, it plays the unequip animation. And finally set process to true. So now let's head over to the process function. So in this very first block of condition, we wait till the unequip animation fully completes. Here is unequip finished returns true or false, and that is determined by the isEquip variable, which is set to false when the unequip animation finishes playing. And that is done through the onAnimationFinished function, which we connected to the animation finished signal. So if the function returns true, meaning unequipping of the old weapon is complete, then we simply proceed ahead and set unequip weapon variable to true, as well as update the current weapon to the new weapon, and finally start the equip animation. So in the next frame, the first block of condition will now be false. So we will proceed ahead to the next block of condition, which checks whether we have finished equipping the weapon or not. And finally, if the function returns true, then we proceed ahead and set changing weapon and process to false. Now we will start by creating a function to update the HUD, and also we can uncomment the line which we earlier commented. So this function is going to act as an interface, but also provide some extra information too. So first of all we will define that extra information, which is going to be the weapon slot. Then we will pass the weapon data and weapon slot to the update weapon UI function of the HUD script, which we are going to create just now. But before that, let's understand this function a little better. The weapon data variable we have over here is passed from the update ammo function in the weapon class, and it is going to contain information like weapon name, ammo, etc. Right now we are passing only name to it. Whereas the weapon slot variable we defined sends the current weapon slot as a string to the update weapon UI function, with which we will later add image of the weapons in our HUD. Now let's create a script for the HUD node and define the function which we were calling from the weapon manager. So here we simply update the labels with the information we got through the function parameters. Now let's add some inputs for changing weapons. Now let's head back to the player script and make the ability to change weapons actually work. But before doing anything, I will put all the code inside physics process into their own functions, so that managing our code becomes much more easier. Now let's create a function to process inputs related to weapons. So we will call the change weapon function of the weapon manager script and pass arguments based on the input actions that we defined. And that's pretty much what we have to write in the process weapon function for now. Finally, we will call the function in physics process. And yes, one thing I forgot to do, and that is to update the HUD in the unarmed script. Because as we overrided the update ammo function, we didn't added the line which updates the HUD. So I'm just going to copy that from weapon.gd and paste it into the unarmed script. Also, don't forget to name the weapons, as the name variable which we defined in the weapon script is going to be used as the weapon name and also displayed on the HUD. So weapon names are indeed changing when I am pressing the keys, but I can't see the weapon themselves, and that's because I once again forgot to do a thing. So if we go to the weapon manager script and at the very start look at the lines where we initialize weapon variables, here we see that we are also setting visible to false. So that means that our weapons won't be visible when we start the game. So to fix this, what I basically do is enable the weapon at the start of the equip animation and disable it at the end of an equip. So I will create two functions, one for enabling and another for disabling, and then call them from the equip and unequip animation clips on all the weapons. And here we go, everything is working just as we want. But the animation speed for both equip and unequip seems a little slow to me. So I will going to increase it for both the weapons. Now this feels much better. So just one more thing to do, and that is to add the ability to change weapon via scroll wheel. So I will head over to the player script and add a few more lines to the input function. Here we simply compare whether we scroll up or scroll down, and based on that we will call the next and previous weapon functions from the weapon manager. So let's switch to the weapon manager script and add those functions to it. Now before creating those functions, I will define a variable called weapon index. Then we will create a function which updates weapon index every time we change the weapon. Now let's create the next and previous weapon functions. And as the name suggests, next weapon will switch to the next weapon slot, while the previous weapon to the previous one. Finally, we call the update weapon index function when we change the weapon. So here we have it. We have created the basics and pretty much most of the time taking stuff of setting up a weapon manager. So in the next coming parts of this FPS series, I will be adding firing and reloading, as well as the ability to pick up and drop weapons, and also a few other things. And if you have any questions or feedback, then feel free to tell me in the comment section down below.